I don't have a fancy presentation, so you'll have to look at me for a few minutes. I will say, thank you for inviting us and for letting us share a little. I wasn't quite sure what kind of detail you wanted Joey and I to go into, but having heard from the state and from Naomi, they've covered a lot of the things that I had put down here. As I said, I'm the emergency manager for Fresno County, and I've been doing this for about 20 years. We were fortunate, I can't remember how many years ago, to have Naomi step forward and start her organization here in our county and in our region. And so since that time, I think we've done a lot to move toward more a more full-scale response for sheltering both pets and livestock. The livestock portion is something we're, I think, always trying to grow and work on. And as Naomi mentioned, we utilize our Sheriff's Department posse and others in that. I did want to talk a moment before we get into some of that about the common disasters here in Fresno County. Wildfire, which you mentioned we may be going over next week, is a common one in our mountain regions, both on the east side and the west side, and where we see animals impacted. Flooding is another one, and fortunately we haven't had many major floods, but in the past we've had some overtopping or breaks in a river, especially out on our west side, where it's impacted some dairies. And I know when CARES was first established, that was one of the reasons that CARES was put together, because of animals being impacted by floods, especially in Northern California. But the other two big things for animals are animal diseases like exotic Newcastle disease. We haven't seen hoof and mouth here, but of course we know about what happened in Britain. And whoops, are you still there? My screen.
We hear you.
Okay, and so we have written and worked on plans for doing quarantining and depopulation. Fortunately, like I said, we haven't had to use that. But the other big thing here is heat, and that seems to impact us every year. We have animal die-off. We've had 2 times this year when our local rendering plant has been unable to address the needs of the animal die-off. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, we've worked with CDFA and some the Water Board and others to come up with plans to allow the livestock operations, particularly dairy owners, to address the mortality in ways that they cannot normally do it. My office, the Office of Emergency Services, some of the things we do in all disasters are we recommend and draft emergency proclamations. We don't always have one for every wildfire, for example. It just depends on how big it is and how much impact is going on. So to do some of the things like the altered rules for animal disposal, we do often have to do a proclamation. So recently during the heat, while it was impacting a number of different things in our county, the reason we had to proclaim is because we needed to have that in place to address disposal of animals. So our office, again, facilitates that and makes sure those happen if needed. We also facilitate communication between the local response agencies and local governments with the state, and that includes both situation reports, what's going on, what resource requests, what's needed. If we need to go outside of the county and seek those from the state, we address that. And then when needed, and again, this is like the proclamation, it doesn't always happen, we will activate our Emergency Operations Center. Many times in some of these fires and things, you see an incident command post set up by fire, and many of the response organizations are there at the incident command post. We may or may not open our EOC, but it just depends on the size of the event. I will say some of the disasters that Naomi as well and the state CDFA person mentioned were very large and very overwhelming. The Camp Fire, we have not had anything like that. The closest thing that size-wise that we've had recently is the Rough Fire. And while we did do some evacuations of both people and animals, it wasn't the same type of overwhelming event. So we did not have to seek state resources for some of the sheltering or things like that. We handled that at a local level. What else did I want to mention? I'm trying not to duplicate some of the things that have already been mentioned. Will we be talking more specifically next week about evacuations?
You're welcome to talk about that now. Next week, we'll focus more on the wildfire specific aspects. So either time is good.
Well, these apply to wildfire. As Naomi mentioned, or I think she had in one of her slides, we have two types of evacuation orders here in our county. The first is a warning, and the second is an order. It'll be our sheriff's office that initiates those and enforces those. For livestock owners, we want them to pay attention to the warning level. It's our lower level and may proceed to a full-scale order. You hear the term mandatory. Mandatory and an order are roughly the same thing, and I know the state's trying to work on making sure everybody's using the same language. But here in Fresno County, it's important if you own livestock and animals to respond early. You know, it takes longer to get your resources together and get out, so we want you to respond when you hear of a warning. And you may need to respond before you even get that. You know, if you know something's in your area, you need to be preparing. I know many people, and myself included, we mentioned that we don't have a written plan for our family or our animals, but I would suggest if you have a large operation that you have an emergency action plan so that you know who you need to call and where your resources are when it's time to go. Since we're going to talk about it next week, I won't go into much about what you need to have, but in general, you know, I think for livestock owners and for all people who respond to or who need to evacuate, we want them to have identified transportation resources, number one, a place to go, number two, and then supplies to take with you. We often refer to that for a family as a go bag. But in your go bag, if you have a dog, you want to take things, you know, food and toys maybe, or a bed for your dog. If you're a livestock owner, you need to think about what things you need to bring for your livestock. And, you know, certainly feed and medicines, things like that, because the county, we don't have any livestock operations that we deal with in the county. So those aren't resources we have readily available. Naomi's already talked about some of the places that we've identified for sheltering animals and livestock as well. Our high schools, some colleges, fairgrounds, rodeo grounds. Those are places that we've identified and that we typically on a yearly basis go out and wait to make sure they're still ready to go. So we feel good about that. I think on the transportation side, what the county can bring to bear, we may be a little more limited. We certainly can't evacuate a whole herd of dairy cattle. So it will depend on the livestock owner to have those resources identified and ready to go. But we can do, you know, a few horses, cattle. I think Naomi's done goats, rabbits, and a whole host of other things. But we have some trailers for that, which are mostly through our sheriff's office. And you saw a picture of our sheriff's posse, which gets involved in that. Kathy Curtis is on the line, and if I forget something she wants me to say, I hope she can chime in. Recently, we've gotten some supplies like fencing for horses and cattle that we can utilize. Also some IDs and other things for animals, which we're grateful that that stuff was provided and it's ready to go. And then lastly, I wanted to mention the term mutual aid. Naomi brought it up in one of her slides, and so within emergency management and what was addressed in the first slide is these requests for mutual aid. So at a county level, when we overwhelm our resources, we can reach out to the state and ask for more. I will tell you in Fresno County, and I think this is true in many counties, when it comes to livestock, we're pretty limited. So we may have to reach out to the state early. And, you know, I don't know how many trucks or other things the state can bring to bear. but that mutual aid system applies at any level. And so I think Naomi called it a buddy system. What you see in medical facilities is that they often identify a like facility where they can move their patients to if something were to happen to their facility. And so I would encourage our livestock owners to think about that as well. Who are people with like operations to me, where I may be able to take my animals or where I may be able to get transportation resources to help me. And so it's that neighbor helping neighbor or buddy system, as Naomi called it, that principle that we would encourage people to utilize and think seriously about, so that, you know, we can all help each other get through a disaster if one were to occur. And I think that's about it for what I have to say.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Wilder. I'm a sergeant with the Madera County Sheriff's Office. So, in compared to Ken, we share the same kind of position in the county. Just in Madera County, the Sheriff's Office has the responsibility for the Office of Emergency Services. And as you go throughout the state, it varies between sheriff's offices and its own department and fire departments. So in our county, it's in the sheriff's office, and that's part of my responsibilities. So Ken covered a lot about what we do and how we interact with the state. For our county, a little bit more in particular, we work with Naomi quite a bit. Naomi is amazing. Naomi has bailed me out many times, so we rely on her on a lot of our evacuation needs for animals, because most of the time we only have 2 animal control officers and they are spread pretty thin, so we can use any of the help we can possibly get. We also leverage our citizen on patrol volunteers and our search and rescue volunteers as well. And in a mass need, I will call Lieutenant Curtis and ask for her folks to help in as well. So it is a neighbor helping neighbor system that we use. But particularly for our county, and the biggest message we try to get out to, especially any large animal owners, of if you get the evacuation warning, that is the time to start making arrangements and getting your livestock out, because of the transportation issues and the time. Generally in our county, we use the same wording that Fresno County uses, a warning and an order. Generally, we tell our citizens a warning is about a 2-hour window. So we're giving you about a 2-hour notice that you could be bumped to an evacuation order. So we really impress upon the folks with large livestock to start making a plan and being able to take care of their own livestock. That is the greatest thing that they could do for the county and other first responders, is have a plan to take care of their own animals. Because if I don't have to worry about taking care of them and everybody else, it frees up my time to be able to help other people. So it's generally helpful, because we had, during the Mission Fire, we had a 200-pound pot-bellied pig that we could not evacuate. We had to have it shelter in place. Naomi's crew and some of the sheriff's deputies were out every day feeding and watering, making sure, and that's just, we'll make it happen. But it's one of those burdens that we have on the incident, that we have to constantly care and watch for the animal if we can't move them. So we really suggest having a plan. So that's about all I have.